Hey everybody, welcome to class. We've got some great topics this week. We're going to start off first of all by talking about, that's right, motivation. Nothing happens without it. There's a lot of great ideas, a lot of great theories of motivation that are going to help you to be more effective leaders and managers in your context, and you need to know about them. Now you might be saying, Dr. Markow, why do we need to know about motivation? Doesn't God motivate people? Isn't the love to serve people, the love to serve God enough to motivate individuals? Why do I have to worry about motivating people? Well, it's true. God does motivate people, and I'd say our experience tells us that we're all motivated by love for God. But I also believe that as a leader in the kingdom, God uses you to motivate people. And conversely, if you're not aware of it, God can use you to demotivate people. So heaven forbid we should be guilty of demotivating people, of not allowing people to reach their best, right? If we know something about what motivates people, then we can be an instrument in God's hands to help motivate them. So of course, our love for God and our desire to serve should always be our primary motivation. But having said that, I still believe that that the Lord's going to use you. He's going to use you as a leader to motivate people. And conversely, if you're unaware, you can actually demotivate people, right? So that's why we need to know these ideas about motivation, okay? So this isn't the be-all and end-all of why people come to your churches and why they serve the Lord, but a wise leader will know some of these ideas and able to help motivate people and to bring out the best in them, right? Because at the end of the day, isn't that what we want? Don't we want people to be their best, to flourish and really excel in our churches and use their gifts and their passions and their skills and give their time and their energy for the kingdom? Isn't that what we all want? I think that's what we all want. Okay, so having said all that, hang on to your hat because we're going to go through a whirlwind tour through the world of motivation. So here we go. Now, right now, I know what you're saying. Wait a minute, he's still there. Usually he disappears now, and we just see the slides. Well, through the magic of advanced video editing, I'm going to stay with you here the whole time. So I'll talk through the slides as I usually do, but then I'm going to kind of maybe break it down and look straight in the camera and say some interesting and profound things. And you'll say, oh, wow, I was glad I could see him when he said that. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been as interesting and profound. All right, enough of that silliness. Here we go. Motivation. Nothing happens without it. So, motivation, more than motivation, plays a role in performance. Performance has to do with people's ability, their instincts, their aspiration level, and then personal factors such as age, education, some of the individual differences that we talked about last week, right? So motivation isn't the only thing that's going to get people to really excel, but it's one of the components. And so if you look at this slide here, you'll see that is one of three components that lead to strong job performance. So if you look on the bottom right, it says opportunity to perform. Are people given a chance? If you look at the bottom left, it says capacity to perform. Do they have the ability, the skills and the maturity and all those kinds of things? But if you look at the top there, and this is where motivation comes in, it says willingness to perform. And these things together can lead to job performance. So if you take any one of these three things out of the mix, you'll see you're not going to get a good performance. So you might have somebody who's got the skills and the capacity and is given the opportunity, but he doesn't have the motivation. Guess what? He's not going to perform. Or if you take, maybe he's willing to do it and he's got the capacity to do it, right? He's willing and able, but he doesn't have the opportunity, right? Because you haven't given him the opportunity, then he's not going to perform, right? So these three things here come in that mix, the determinants of job performance. Now we're really just going to focus in on that top circle here today. So there's three components of motivation: direction, persistence, and intensity. Now it's believed that there's this general model of motivation, and it starts off at the top there. You'll see with needs deficiency, right? So people have a need they're trying to satisfy, and so they search for ways to satisfy it, which leads to goal-directed behavior. Then they perform, and they, depending on how well they do, they're rewarded or punished. And then their needs deficiencies are reassessed, and it leads back to the beginning of the cycle. Okay, so let's just say, for example, somebody's coming to your church and they really have a high social need, right? And they say, boy, if I get involved in the women's ministry, I can satisfy that social need. right? And so that's what's directing them. That's their goal, is to meet that social need. And they perform and they get involved, and people say, "Well, you did a really good job. We really appreciate you being part of this ministry." And that's their reward, right? The acknowledgement and the reward of satisfaction of a good job, right? And so they say, that was good. I like that. And so then they stay back in the game, right? So that's kind of a general, working hypothesis of how this motivational process works. Now, there's several types. There's two main areas of motivational theories. The first one are called the content theories, which focus on factors within the person and the needs that motivate people. And then there's the process theories, which describe, explain, and analyze how behavior is energized, directed, sustained, and stopped. So let's take a look at the content theories first. And you might be familiar with some of these, but if not, you're going to learn all about them. They're Maslow's need hierarchy, Alderfer's ERG theory, Herzberg's two-factor, and McClelland's learned needs. So let's take a look at these. Now, this may be familiar to you if you've had an introductory psychology class. This is Maslow's needs hierarchy. And the basic idea here is that we have basic physiological needs, right, for safety, security, just to be alive, to stay alive, right? And then we move up to more of those social kinds of needs, belongingness, and then self-esteem, and then self-actualization, right? This idea that we've arrived, that we're complete and full as a human being. All right, so if you look in the slide here, I know it's kind of small, maybe look at this chart in your book, you can see this much better. But you'll see within a work context, the psychological needs are things like receiving a sufficient salary. The safety and security needs are things like receiving an increase or having a medical and disability insurance, right? So it's one thing to get paid, it's another to have insurance to feel safe and that your family is being provided for in case anything happens. Then there's the belongingness needs, being accepted by personal and professional friends, working in groups that are cooperative, having a supportive supervisor, those sorts of things. Then there's the esteem needs, winning a coveted warrant for performance, all right? So you do a good job, people notice it, right? You're the employee of the month, that kind of thing. Receiving a high-level promotion, an advancement from one position to the next. And then the ultimate one, right, the hypothetical self-actualization, starting a successful new business or developing and mentoring others, or maybe, start launching your own church, doing your own church plan, or starting your own ministry, right? That's where you're kind of taking all the goods, everything you've got, your experience and passions and calling, and boom, you're able to do those things. All right, so this is kind of a basic working model of Maslow. So the approach says that a satisfied need ceases to motivate. So once we've reached one level, it's not going to motivate us anymore. We move on to that next level. And then unsatisfied needs can cause frustration, conflict, and stress. And people have a need to grow and develop. They strive to move up the hierarchy. All right, so they're kind of moving from down here up to here. That's sort of the general premise here. You like how I did that? See, they're kind of moving from down here up to here. Fun stuff, huh? Now, is this a perfect theory? No. There's been some criticism over the years. There's little data that proves that a needs hierarchy exists, right? So we're talking about empirical social science theories here. It's intuitive, right? We've been thinking about it for a long time, but they don't have a whole lot of empirical data to support this one. And only two needs levels exist: physiological and then all others. Security needs decrease as managers advance, with a corresponding increase in the need for social interaction, achievement, and self-actualization. Okay, so that's our starting point. So put a pin in it. We're going to move on to the next one here. Now, Alderfer's ERG needs correspond to Maslow's hierarchy, but he discusses them in three categories. Existence needs, which are physiological and safety, that's sort of the bottom part of Maslow, right? Relatedness, which is belonging, social, love, and then growth, esteem, and self-actualization, right? So if you read those descriptions, you can kind of see how they fit into Maslow's pyramid. And then, but here's the difference, though. It doesn't say, Alderfer doesn't say you just kind of move up here and then you're satisfied. It's called the frustration regression process, right? So if one continually fails to satisfy a growth need, then the related needs reemerge. Efforts will be redirected towards satisfying a lower order need, right? So let's just say let's go back to the well, let's just say your existence needs are met, right? Let's just say you're getting enough pay and you're satisfied and you've got cool working condition. And then you meet people at work, right? So your relatedness needs are being met. But then your growth needs, let's just say, you want to move on, you want more challenging work, you want some room to grow, you want to be able to develop some new ideas, and let's just say that gets frustrated, right? So if that's frustrated, then you will kind of go back and regress to those relatedness needs. And if the relatedness needs aren't being met, then you regress and go back to those existence needs. Does that make sense? So if you're not fitting in, let's just say, you have a fight with your work group and all of a sudden you're being shunned or you're just not getting along with people, you will throw yourself back into your work and you'll kind of focus and work hard just to, to make money and satisfy that need. And then, so that's kind of how that works. It's similar to Maslow, but it kind of has this idea that if one area is frustrated, then we'll go back and we'll try to satisfy our own needs. Now, we kind of see this in people who are workaholics, for example. They go home and they've got a funky work life, and nobody likes them at home, or they're having problems at home. They become workaholics, right? They throw themselves into their work. So it's sort of a holistic, not just a job specific, but it can help us explain why people throw themselves into work if one particular need isn't being met. All right. Then the next one here. This is called Herzberg's two-factor theory, a content theory with two motivation factors, which are called dissatisfiers and satisfiers, or hygiene factors. By the way, it's hygiene factors, has nothing to do with, soap and staying clean. He's got bad hygiene or good hygiene, doesn't brush his teeth. It's not that kind of hygiene. They're just called hygiene factors because they're related to sort of physical sort of things. So, for example, salary, job security, working condition, status, company procedures, interpersonal relationships. And then there's what are called the satisfiers or motivators, and these are the intrinsic conditions. Intrinsic means internal. And these are things like the job content itself, achievement, recognition, responsibility, advancement, possibility of growth. Okay, so the way this thing works, it basically says that if you don't have these hygiene factors, for example, if you don't have the pay, if you don't have meaningful work, if you don't have the pay or the status or the job security, or if the working conditions are bad, no fringe benefits, those sorts of things, then you will be dissatisfied, right? You'll have low job satisfaction. But those things alone are not enough to motivate you, right? So you'll be dissatisfied if you don't have them, but you won't be motivated if you have them. And so that's where this other factor comes in, these motivators. And these are things like a feeling of achievement or meaningful work or opportunities for advancement. Those are the things that actually motivate us, right? So this is an interesting theory because it helps us distinguish between some of these tangible physical things that we need and then some of these more abstract, higher level things that we also need, right? So feelings of accomplishment or achievement, opportunities to advance, recognition, opportunities for growth, right? So if these things are not there, then no matter how solid this is, we're not going to be motivated. So let me just give you a good example. Let's just say, let's just say one of your staff guys comes into you, right, and says, I've been working really hard here, and I really want some opportunities from change. I want to try some new things. I think I've kind of dialed in this task that you've given me. Let's just say it's the youth guy, right? Really dialed. The youth's going really well. I was wondering, can I preach once in a while? Can I lead something different? Can I start something? Can I do my own service? Something like that. He said, well, and you're the pastor. He said, well, tell you what, I'm going to give you a pay raise because you've done such a good job. I'm going to double your pay. Right? You with me? And the guy says, let's see. I'm kind of feeling a little dissatisfied, but double my pay? That sounds pretty attractive. I'll take it. I'll stick around. I'll keep doing the youth pastor gig. So he's making more money, goes out, buys a new car, right? Buys some new clothes, maybe buys a Rolex watch, depending on what kind of environment you're in. And then 3 months comes along, and he's like, yeah, car's nice, clothes are nice, but I'm still doing the same funky work. There's no new opportunities. There's no new challenge. There's no room for growth. Guess what? The momentary high of making that additional money is going to dissipate. He's still going to be frustrated because he hasn't reached those motivator sorts of things. So this is kind of a common example as we try to satisfy these higher aspirational things with these lower order hygiene factors like pay and security and one of those kinds of things, right? So it's important for us to know. I think this is a useful one, right? That we're not trying to satisfy people. And what's the upside of this? Well, the upside is, in ministry, let's face it, we don't have a lot of money to throw around a lot of times at people, right? So we can't just say, hey, I'm going to give you a bonus because you did a great job, right? I'm going to increase your salary, you did a good job, right? We're all kind of living, not all of us, but sometimes things can be a bit challenging, and maybe you're even a volunteer situation. All your people are volunteers. Well, guess what? You don't have to motivate them with these things. In fact, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, the relationship between these intrinsic and extrinsic things. But you can motivate people with some of the other things, right? So giving them opportunities for meaningful work, give them opportunities to advance, give them recognition. How much do those things cost you? Bing! That's right, they don't cost you anything. It doesn't cost you anything to recognize somebody. It doesn't cost you anything to help people understand the meaningfulness of their work, right? So sometimes we get hung up when we say, well, I can't really grow or do anything because I don't have any money to do it. You're not understanding how motivation works. People want those things, but the presence of those things is not necessarily going to motivate them, right? Okay, so I hope this was helpful. Let's move on. So now there has been some criticisms, oversimplifies the nature of work, requires people to look at themselves, over self-report, little testing. Okay. Having said that, I think it's still a very useful and intuitively appealing theory. Let's move on. McClellan's learned needs theory. Now, McClellan believes that needs are acquired from culture, and he basically has three different kinds of needs. There's need for achievement, affiliation, and power. When a need is strong, there's motivation to use behavior that leads to its satisfaction. All right. So, for example, the high achievement, or ACH as it's called here, these folks like to take responsibility for solving problems. They set moderate achievement goals and take calculated risks. They desire feedback on their performance. People with a high power need concentrate on obtaining and exercising power and authority, concerned with influencing others and winning arguments, and power can be negative or positive. And then high affiliation needs, these folks desire social interaction. They're concerned about the quality of personal relationships, and social relationships take precedent over task accomplishment. All right, so what's the deal with this one, right? You have to understand there's different things that motivate people. So some people might actually have a high need for power. They want to be in control. They want to influence others. Now, is that always a bad thing? Well, it can be positive or negative, right? So you might have some kind of, Machiavellian, maniacal people that are just into manipulating, controlling people. But we don't see that a whole lot, right? I think it's just a genuine need. Some people, they like to, they like to influence. They like to run things. So what do? Don't put that person in a situation where they're being motivated by the social interaction. Give them some opportunities to lead, right? Give them opportunities to control some things. Conversely, you might have somebody with a high need for this one here, the affiliation, right? So they like the social environment, they like to be with people. That's what motivates them. Putting them in charge of something, right, is not necessarily going to motivate them. Put them in an opportunity where they can have relationships or relate with people and develop quality relationships. That will motivate that person. Now, this chart here compares the different content approaches. So if you look on the left, you'll see Maslow's hierarchy, right? And then overlaid on that are the other three, Herzberg, Alderfer, and McClellan. So you can sort of see a similarity, but they all have sort of a different twist. So Herzberger with the satisfiers and dissatisfiers, Alderfer with that regression cycle, and then McClellan, those are called learned needs, right? So people have those needs, but they're sort of intrinsic. They've learned those from their culture and their family, etc. That's what McClellan's would be. All right, that moves us on then to the process theories. While the content theories focus primarily on the needs and incentives that cause behavior, they try to explain how behavior is energized, directed, maintained, and stopped. Process theories of motivation are concerned with answering the questions of how individual behavior is energized, directed, maintained, and stopped. And so we're going to look at three here: expectancy theory, equity theory, and goal setting. All right, Vroom's expectancy theory. Employees are more likely to be motivated when they perceive that effort equals successful performance plus the desired reward outcomes. Motivation is a process governing choices among alternate forms of voluntary activity. Most behaviors are under the voluntary control of the individual and consequently are motivated. And so folks will look at three different things in terms of the goals, the instrumentality, the perception that first level outcomes are tied to second level outcomes, rewards or punishments, the valence, an individual's preference for the outcomes, and expectancy, the belief that a particular behavior will be followed by a particular outcome. All right, this all sounds very confusing, doesn't it? Let me simplify it for you. Basically, when somebody's considering doing something, first of all, they'll say, do I like that goal? Do I think that's desirable? Then they'll say, do I think I can attain it? Do I have the belief that if I do this, that I'll actually accomplish that goal? And they believe that if they work hard, they'll get the goal, that the goal is actually accomplishable, right? So that's kind of, in a nutshell, expectancy theory. It's the desire. So how does this work in practice? Something's not going to motivate somebody if they don't think they can accomplish it, or if that goal is not actually desirable. So you might say, hey, everybody, come on out to, we're going to have a time on Saturday morning, and everybody's going to help clean up the facilities, right? And everyone's like, oh, great, I got to show up my lawnmower and put on my grubbies and all that. Now, some people like that, but some people don't. No judgment. You might be a lawnmower grubby guy. You might not be a lawnmower grubby guy. But how do you motivate those people? You might say, tell you what, we're going to have a contest, and we're going to have I'm going to put a gift card for Starbucks for $20, and everybody's going to put their name in the hat, and at the end of the day we'll draw it, and somebody will get $20. All right, well, maybe I drink coffee, maybe I don't. Maybe $20 is a lot of money, maybe it's not. Okay, so you're thinking, man, $20 is a lot of money. I'd love to have a $20 gift card to Starbucks. But somebody's out there saying, yeah, you know what, it's not my thing. It's not my thing. First of all, there's 100 people are going to show up. The chances of me winning are what? 1 in 100. Okay, so the expectancy is kind of low. And then the valence, my preference for that particular goal, right, that Starbucks card, is pretty low. Okay, so that's not going to motivate that person. So you see how that works? So you have to figure out what motivates people, the goal, and then increase the likelihood that they're going to accomplish that goal. Equity theory. Now, I like this one a lot. One's perception of being treated fairly in social exchanges can influence motivation. Equity exists when one perceives that the ratio of their inputs to the outcomes equals the ratios of other employees. Okay, so important terms in this theory here are the person, the individual for whom equity or inequity is perceived, comparison to others, any group or person used as a referent by a person regarding the ratio of inputs and outcomes. The inputs, the individual characteristics brought by a person to the job, and the outcomes, what the person receives from the job. Okay, so here is a little model that shows you how this works. So if you look all the way on the left there, a person with certain inputs receiving certain outcomes compares his input and output ratio to referent person, and the person then regards the referent person's inputs and outcomes and perceives either that it's equitable, it's the same, or inequitable or inequitable. Now, okay, let me break this one down for you. You're probably saying this is a lot of strange jargon. Here's the idea. If you work hard, let's just say, let me give you an example. Let's just say you have your degree from Life Pacific College, right? You've got your MASL, and you get a position at a nonprofit, and somebody else, a friend of yours, also has that same degree, and he gets the job at the nonprofit. And you guys both start at the same time, right? Let's just say you've known this guy for a long time, and you have the same experience, the same opportunities, right? About the same age, about the same good lookingness, right? It's not like he's like totally stunning and you're like this dorky looking dude. You look the same. Everything's the same, all right? Just this hypothetical. And so you start, you've got the same degree and you start. And 6 months, the boss starts noticing your friend and says, you're doing a really good job. And you're thinking, well, I'm doing a good job. How come he's not noticing me? And then a year later, the boss goes to your friend and says, you've done such a good job. I'm going to give you a promotion. You're no longer going to do this job. You're going to move up now. So you're not going to be a frontline person. You're going to be a manager. I'm going to make you a manager, and you're going to oversee the staff. And you're thinking, wait a minute. I've been working here the same length of time. I've got the same degree. I'm just as good looking as that person. And yet they are advancing. I'm working as hard. I see what he does every day. I'm working as hard. Okay, that's going to be a perceived inequity. So you're comparing your inputs. Let's go back to our chart here. You're comparing your inputs and the outcomes, right? Your input is the hard work, the outcome is the raise or the not raise. And you're comparing that with somebody else, the referent person. Now, the referent person has to be somebody who you believe is the same as you in this same general category. And then you compare the outcomes of that person, and you either see equity or inequity. All right? Does that make sense? All right. So what happens in this scenario here, right? Same education, same background, you work just as hard, and Joe, let's just call him Joe for now, who's just as good looking as you. In fact, you might even be a little better looking than Joe. He gets a promotion after a year and you don't. What's going to happen? Well, let's take a look at this next slide here. There are some likely outcomes here. The first one is changing inputs. What does that mean? That means you're going to stop working as hard. You're not going to work as hard. You're going to change the inputs. You say, well, forget that. If I'm going to work that hard and not get my promotion like Joe, I'm just going to reduce my outputs. Or changing the outcomes. I'm not exactly sure what that one means. Changing the attitudes. Changing the attitude, remember we talked about attitude, is, well, maybe that outcome isn't as important as I thought it was. Look at all the work he's got to do. He's got to work overtime now. Kind of like sour grapes. I didn't really want that anyhow, right? It's changing your attitude about it. Or changing the referent person. Well, Joe, actually we went to the same school, but he actually was a better student than I was. He got A's and B's all the time. I got B's and C's, so maybe Joe did deserve it, right? So we change that referent. We sort of reconfigure that referent person or our attitude about that referent person. Or changing the inputs or outcomes of the referent person. Or leaving the field. What does leaving the field mean? That's it, I'm out of here, I'm quitting. All right, so you might be saying, well, what does this all have to do with, with the price of tea in China? Well, look, you've got to understand that people want to know that their work is being graded and judged equally to their peers, right? So if you single out people, sort of idiosyncratically, right, kind of these individual special deals, their peers might look at it and say, that doesn't seem fair, right? And think about your own experience. Haven't you ever had times where you say, well, that's not fair? Now, invariably, people look at that scripture and they talk about the parable, with the manager, right, and the guys who came in early in the day and they did all that hard work, and then people came in late in the day and they did all the hard work, and then pay time, they all got paid the same, right? Now, the manager had the prerogative to pay them whenever he wanted, right? Yeah, he did. But what was the outcome here, right? He had a bunch of unhappy people at the end of the day. He had to sit down, and they all felt unfair. So I think this really demonstrates the point that they felt that inequity of working. The people who worked all day, right, in the heat of the day, whatever it says there, they felt unfair because the people who came later didn't work as much, but they got the same reward. They got the same compensation, right? So those people show that it's kind of in our nature. Now the manager says, what, I hired them? I told you how much you were going to get? Now, that's not, the parable is to talk about the entrance of the Gentiles into the kingdom, right? I think that's what Jesus was trying to tell us. It's not a theory of management by which you should model your practice after, right? So I know some people say, well, look at that. Yeah, to me, it's a perfect example of, why people get ticked off when they're treated unfairly. So don't be a manager that treats people unfairly. Be above board. We're going to talk about this in a second here. Okay, now the next step here is what's called organizational justice, the degree to which individuals feel fairly treated at the workplace. Procedural justice has been shown to have a positive impact on the number of effective and behavioral reactions. For example, organizational commitment, intrinsic motivation, etc., etc. People are more inclined to interpret decisions as fair when they have a voice in the decision, decision making is consistent, the process and procedures conform to ethical and moral values. Why does it work? Well, here's some ideas here: self-interest theory, group theory, and then there's interpersonal justice, judgments made by employees as to whether they feel they're treated fairly. Perceptions of justice are higher when employees are treated with dignity and respect, etc. And then there's informational justice, perceived fairness of the communication provided to employees from authorities, keep many channels open and communicate frequently, utilize informal chats, and don't sugarcoat bad news. All right, so what is all this stuff about? This is the way to sort of minimize this perceived inequity, right? So if we know that inequity is a bad thing and people will change their inputs or they'll, they'll leave or whatever. What can we do to sort of make that equal? Well, that's what procedural justice comes in, right? Or organizational justice. And so procedural justice says people are more inclined to interpret a decision when they're fair when they have a voice in the decision, right? So this is why you do things like focus groups. This is why you have team meetings, and this is why what's the term where you kind of fly things up the flagpole, right? You ever see that? We're going to run this up the flagpole and see if anybody salutes. We're going to throw this against the wall and see if it sticks, right? You do some of these things because you're trying to test the waters. You're not acquiescing to the feelings of the group, which is not always a bad idea, right? I mean, sometimes the group decision making works, but that's not the point here. The point is that you get people involved in the decision. Hey, we're thinking about changing service times to 10 o'clock. What do you all think? Well, it's kind of a hassle for me. I was kind of used to getting off at noon, but I'm going to stick around till 2 o'clock now. I really like the 8 o'clock service. But, what does everybody else think? They've got to voice their opinion, and regardless of whether their idea is accepted or not, right? So they may not like the fact that the service was changed, but the fact that they had a voice in the decision making is going to make it more likely that they'll accept that decision when it comes down, right? So I think, the self-interest idea says that people just want to know that they are heard, that they are valued, that they're part of the conversation, right? What are some other things I want to say about this here? So informational justice. So this is important too. People want to know why. I'm sorry, I was talking about procedural justice here. People want to know. I know I'm bouncing around here. You're going nuts. People want to know how a decision was made. So I think this is important too. So not only having a say in the decision, but how was the decision made? So sometimes it can seem like decisions were made capriciously or without much thought or without the input of people, right? So one day, all of a sudden, this memo comes out that says we're going to do X and Y. Why did we do that? Why did we decide to do X and Y? Nobody wants to do X and Y. Well, that's just the decision that came down from on high. So that when people don't know, they're likely to see something as unfair. But if you explain to them and say, here was our rationale. Let's just say you're talking about hiring a new staff person, right? Everybody wants a new staff person. They think it's going to be important. And, you're talking about, are we going to interview people? Are people going to ask me what I think, who the next new hire should be? I really need somebody in my department. And then lo and behold, the new guy shows up and says, hey, everybody, here's Samantha. She's our new hire. And everybody's like, Samantha, she seems like a nice gal, but, how was this process arrived at? Why did we decide to hire her in that department, right? So now that's scenario A. Scenario B is, okay, we've looked at all the needs, we've looked at all the departments, all the staffing, we've talked to all the managers, and the staff, the key leadership have decided that we're going to staff this department first. And then next year we're going to staff that department. And then the year after that we're going to staff this department. And here's what we're looking for in a candidate. We're looking for somebody with this experience, this education, and this background. And we're going to hire them by this date. Okay, so now all of a sudden everybody knows. So when Samantha shows up, you know exactly why she was chosen. You know that they were looking to staff that department. You know what kind of candidates were there. In fact, we can add this here. Everybody was sent the different resumes. You've got 5 resumes of 5 different people, and you looked at it and you kind of said, yeah, I think this one's good, right? So there's a little bit of consensus and buy-in about who it is. And then one day Samantha comes out and you're like, okay, yeah, I saw her resume. She's cool. I know we're going to staff her that department. Next year we'll staff her my department, but I'm okay with that. Okay, so that's just an example of procedural justice. So people understand, they're informed about how things were made. And churches were really bad at this. And pastors kind of have this like, I'm going to go in my closet, make this decision, and make this pronouncement from on high. Or this, God told me to do this. Now, maybe God did tell you to do that. But I think a wise manager says, let's bring people into the process. Let's get them involved in the process. Maybe God can speak to you and speak in the situation through another person in the organization, right? So, we don't believe that we're like the high priest and we're the only people that have access to knowledge of God, right? Other people in your church hear from God too. So let them be involved in the decision making. All right. Enough of that. And then there's goal setting, and I think I've said enough about this one. I'll let you guys read this one on your own. Now, let me just say one other thing here, and this regards the psychological contract. Now, the psychological contract, I'm gonna go off the slide here. I'm just gonna look you in the eye and tell you what the psychological contract is. Okay? Probably read about it in the book already, but I'm gonna tell you my take on it. Psychological contract is this idea people have certain expectations when they show up to work. They expect to be treated fairly, like we just talked about. They expect to be, secure. They, like you're not going to fire them in a week or in a month, right? Or even a year. They expect to be treated fairly, kindly. They expect to have pleasant relationships. They expect to have opportunities, right? Now, they don't say these things when they show up, right? That's why it's called the psychological contract. It's all up here, right? It's written down in their gray matter. And so now, on the other hand, the employer has also expectations too. This person's going to show up on time. They're going to work hard. They're going to be loyal. They're not going to be a troublemaker, right? They're going to help the organ. They're going to be loyal to the organization. Did I say that twice? I guess loyalty is important to me. So that's sort of the expectations. And so this has to do with motivation, because if people's unspoken thoughts about what the job's going to be like aren't met, they're going to be demotivated right off the bat, right? So if you look at some of the the slides here, you'll see it has to do with the mutual expectations. I already said all this. It can change over time. Okay, now this is an important little tidbit here too. It can change over time. So you might hire somebody, in year one, you hired them to do a specific job. But then in year 3, all of a sudden they're thinking, I've been doing this job for a couple of years now, and my implicit assumption here is there are going to be opportunities, right? That was the assumption. Nobody said that to me, but I just assumed that if I worked hard, I would have opportunities to advance around here. So year 3, same job. Year 5, same job. Year 7, same job, right? People are going to start getting a little antsy because now all of a sudden they have different expectations. They want to do more. They want to do different things. And these implicit agreements may take precedent over written agreements, right? So that you might have a job description. You might see the job description when you show up, but in time you're like, I kind of do those things. I kind of don't do really those things. I do a lot of other things too, and I really want to do more of these things, right? So what people think in their head is going to take precedent over this. So a psychological contract breach is the perception that the organization has failed to fulfill an unwritten exchange agreement. A violation in the psychological contract can lead to decreased job satisfaction and citizenship behavior. Okay, so that's the whole point here, right? So we can try to write down some things, but helping people to be realistic about expectations, about growth curves, about opportunities, if you're a small church, mom and pop church, and somebody comes in and they're expecting to take over the world or start their own church or whatever, you might want to winnow out people that have wrong expectations, help them to temper their expectations about what's really going to happen here. Okay, so you don't want to violate that psychological contract before it even starts. All right, well, that's about enough of motivation. I hope this has been helpful here. I've tried to give you some illustrations and examples of all this stuff that maybe you can relate to in your context. We'll have some opportunities to discuss this online, so thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you later.